Today, some of the fires are still burning, only a few of about 30 all over the city. This reporter has covered wars and undeclared wars, riots and revolutions some 15 years. But the night here in Belfast was the worst single night of violence I've ever seen. And that includes Nicosia and Cyprus, Beirut in the Lebanon, Algiers in Algeria, Leopoldville in the Congo.
In the 1950s and 60s, Frank Kearns was the go-to guy at CBS News for dangerous stories in Africa and the Middle East. When the number of times he faced death reached 114, he stopped counting.
You need someone like Frank to go out into uncomfortable places, dangerous places, and get the story.
The battle moves to the rooftops now. Rooftop sniping on all the roofs. This man just behind me, just as we came up the stairs, a bullet nicked about 1 foot from his head. Yeah, very funny.
You saw it was courage. I mean, in everything he pulled off. You know, war after war. He covered every damn war in Africa. In the years that he was a journalist. Didn't miss one.
I would have thought that Frank was highly successful and and absolutely one of the best CBS correspondents I ever came across, and I saw a lot of them.
This is Frank Kearns in Gaza. Now back to Walter Cronkite in New York.
I don't know where, under what circumstances he grew up, what the influences on him were, what made him into what he was. But he was a cosmopolitan man in the best sense of the word, and very fruitful, very important to CBS News. And in the end deserved better than the way his reputation worked out.
Frank said to me, "I think I have to tell you something." He said, "This evening on the evening news, all hell's going to break loose." And I said, "Why?" He was very upset, and he said, "CBS is going to tell the world that I was a spy for the CIA."
In the aftermath of Vietnam and Watergate, the United States Senate established a committee to investigate alleged misdeeds by American intelligence services. They were particularly interested in the CIA's covert relationships with the American media, both for collecting intelligence and for cover. On the CBS Evening News, February 10, 1976, correspondent Daniel Shore reported that CBS News President Sig Mickelson told the Senate committee that two of his reporters in the 1950s, Frank Kearns in Cairo and Austin Goodrich in Stockholm, were employed by the CIA.
Kearns, now a journalism professor at the University of West Virginia, commented, "I deny it."
During all the years I was a CBS News staff correspondent, I had no connection whatsoever, none, with the CIA or any other intelligence agency. Frank Kearns.
In his denial, Kearns omitted his earlier years in Cairo, where he worked part-time for the network. Often he was seen there in the company of certain Americans with whom he shared the same values and ideals, as well as friendships going back to the war years in London. They were CIA. The story of Frank Kearns, CBS, and the CIA is one of long-standing and complicated relationships. It started with Kearns' absolute belief that America and its ideals were endangered by the spread of the Soviet Union's influence and its model of a totalitarian society. He accepted the propaganda used by the U.S. government and its outlets in the media, which warned of the Red Menace and the danger of nuclear Armageddon in the 1950s.
There are important stakes in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Let's not minimize this. When it comes to Europe, for example, Washington and Moscow are fighting to become the dominant power on the continent after World War II. And they're doing that politically and by building up their militaries and by providing economic aid.
But this was a different kind of conflict. One government official described it as a war that isn't a war.
The black portion of the map is the communist-dominated part of the world controlled by the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communist regime.
This was a Cold War with differing views of truth. It was waged with sophisticated government propaganda on both sides. Its outlet in the United States was an emerging new medium called television.